Separating the artist from the art is a constant refrain as it relates to the music of Kanye West. The argument being that you can't separate Kanye's music from the larger than life context that he inhabits, for better or for worse. But just like I agree, you indeed cannot separate an artist like Kanye from his art, I think a under discussed or different kind of side of that coin is that you also can't separate the listener's inherent biases and life circumstances from their experience consuming the art either. I'm obviously not breaking any new ground here. Obviously, as listeners, we bring our own lives and experiences into the act of listening and consuming a piece of music. But for me, with Kanye, he's played a particularly important role in my life that simply cannot be removed from the equation when it comes to how I take in his music. So I feel it's relevant to address the uniquely personal context that this review of the new Kanye West album, Donda, is being created from, which I think will very clearly show that music discussion, criticism, whatever you want to call it, can't be objective. And in my opinion, is more interesting and multidimensional when one factors in the context behind their feelings towards a given record and why you may come to these conclusions and have these certain opinions on a piece of art. And also, plainly speaking here, I want to take this time to get a few things off my chest personally. And I want to share a piece of myself through the lens of Kanye West. So on Donda, the Chicago Legends' 10th studio album, not only do the themes of loss come through loud and clear from Kanye, but as it relates to my personal experience with this album and Kanye's music generally, Donda serves as an unfortunate representation or reminder of loss in my own life in a few different ways. As the figurative loss of my favorite artist that used to inspire me, but also loss that is far more significant than that. As this album was my breakup album, essentially. And finally, larger than the scope of just this Donda album, my experience with Donda brought to mind my whole relationship with Kanye's music, which was birthed from the biggest loss of all, the loss of my mom. All right, let's do it. Part of me doesn't really understand why I'm gonna go in this little personal diatribe direction, but I feel like it'll be therapeutic. But also, I think it'll show a lot of context to my eventual conclusions and opinions on Kanye and Donda as an album. Okay, so I connect with Kanye's music more than most because he was the first artist that made me feel something and very plainly helped me in a time of need. As I prepared for this review, I had a light bulb moment as I realized for the first time that my very first moments truly diving into music directly coincided with the death of my mother. It seems like an obvious connection to make, honestly, when you think about it, but I just genuinely never realized until legitimately right now. 2005 was the year, I was 10 years old, and I remember listening to my first full album at the time, Kanye's Late Registration, with my best friend at the time, Jeff. We would listen to it together on his iPod Nano by sharing those classic but trash iPod earbuds during recess. And from that point forward, through the aid of Kanye's music primarily, I think I really started to begin healing from the death of my mother that still to this day feels like something that truly hasn't all the way registered with me emotionally. Instead, music was the main channel where I actually unconsciously was able to sort of process these feelings of confusion, anger, sadness, And at the time, there was no one's music I played more than Kanye West. 808s and Heartbreak came out a few years later in 2018 and was the first CD I ever bought, which was supposed to be a gift for my sister, but turns out that my initial choice for a gift, Paper Trail by T.I., was sold out. So I settled for 808s and Heartbreak, a copy I found at my local Best Buy. And 2008 was, for me, the first time that I feel like this latent depression that I had had for years began to be something I slowly but surely acknowledged and recognized. And I credit listening to 808s as being a key reason why I began to be able to lay the foundation for this self understanding, I guess you could say. And at the time, I know I didn't consciously gravitate to 808s as some way to indulge in my feelings about my mother passing or my general feelings of sadness that I had at the time, seeing as 808s, of course, had Kanye wallow in his sadness from the loss of his mother, Donda West, and his failed engagement with his fiance. But at the same time, I absolutely do know that I did this in hindsight. I was leaning on 808s for far more than its groundbreaking traits that helped shape hip hop as we know and love it today. Because although I surely would say I liked the album at the time, for years I never truly acknowledged how much I actually loved it. After playing it for months and months on end when it first dropped, I avoided that album very distinctly for many years after, mainly because it would bring back those really raw and fresh, uncomfortable memories that I just didn't want to think about. This deeper connection, though, with Kanye's music doesn't end there in the slightest. In 2010, when I broke my arm in my second football practice ever, I felt like a complete weakling and failure. Good Fridays, though, and his magnum opus, Dark Twisted Fantasy, were releasing right around that time and gave me something to be excited for and genuinely lifted my spirits to just not lay down and give up, but instead rise up to the challenge, recover quickly, and actually start working out seriously. Even in 2011, as this depression I was slowly beginning to acknowledge now started to really permeate my day to day life very negatively, seeing me grow more listless and discouraged with life by the day. I remember having to be bedridden, stuck at home like a vegetable due to wisdom teeth surgery during that summer. But lo and behold, right when I needed it, I had the fun Watch the Throne CD in my hands that had just dropped, playing it nonstop, which honestly made that experience so much more bearable and helped curb the self loathing that I was starting to aggressively feed into around that time in my life. And now, fast forward 10 years later, as my musical tastes have expanded tenfold and I've matured in dog years, I feel since. Kanye isn't at all the same force in my life that he used to be. Not just in terms of like he's the only artist I listened to back then, and I definitely don't do that now. I just mean generally. I don't keep up with the guy like that. I don't listen to him like that. I still obviously love a lot of his music, but it's obviously not the same. He's not this demigod that I used to really look up to in the past. I've actually grown to dislike many parts of who Kanye is now, or at least detach somewhat from the Kanye that many of us are disappointed to see nowadays. And yet, once again, a Kanye album drops with almost divine timing. As currently, I find myself dealing with a breakup from a very special girl, along with developing a growing sense of detachment, dissatisfaction with myself, my friends, where I live, what I stand for as a man. Plain and simple, I just feel very alone and very confused. I distinctly remember playing Donda in the car consistently during the final month of me living together with my ex. Specifically on September 1st, too, when I helped her move out, driving back and forth between the two apartments. It was an album she liked and I liked, so I played this more often than not. And during these car rides, we would surely talk amicably and normally for the most part, like we typically would. But we would also share many moments where we would both sit in silence as this album played, where I just know that we both simultaneously, momentarily got sucked into the sadness and fear related to us breaking up. Those blank stares looking out into the distance through my Chevy Impala windshield is something that I'll never forget. A month has passed now, and while my state of mind is generally better, I know I'm mentally running away from these feelings of loss, trying to keep busy with the podcast and building a good health routine and all that. But whenever I put Donda on, I'm transported back to those times in my car, listening to Moon and feeling like it was written for us in that very moment. To sum all this up, Kanye's music has helped me process emotions, find a sense of joy, confidence, and passion too. And one of the primary reasons outside of this divine timing that his releases have kind of coincided with big life events or meaningful life events for me is that I actually see a part of myself in Kanye. To me, Kanye's music in general makes me confront my own vanity inside of me. Because what is Kanye if not for vain? If someone does X, obviously it's because something I did or I said. If Y happens, obviously it's because something I did or I said or didn't do or didn't say. This idea that every single result and outcome in your life is somehow related to something you specifically did is a sort of destructive internal locus of control issue that I battle with every single day. This is the same destructive tendency that I feel he and I really possess, which serves as a jet fuel for people like Kanye, feeding this godlike level of confidence and belief in themselves that we have come accustomed to seeing from Kanye. Because if you genuinely think that just about every success or failure in your life is truly a result of your own doing and that alone, imagine the incredible highs you must feel when you're as successful as a Kanye is. And then imagine the incredible lows you must feel whenever you experience fierce criticism, negativity, or tragic loss. I'm not saying I'm Kanye. That's stupid. I'm not. But some of my most active character traits I feel are very similar to Kanye's. Not only do we have this intense internal locus of control, as I just explained, where we feel like we have the weight of our world on our shoulders, but we also are dreamers at our core, with the belief that achieving our dreams is basically in our hands if we just try hard enough and make the right decisions. This can lead to self-destructive behavior and I think can lead to very toxic behavior too. It's obviously nice to be really idealistic and have a internal locus of control that can be very motivating for you to pursue these lofty dreams that I have and that I mean we all see that Kanye has. But we can also see this negatively manifest in Kanye's recent conservative beliefs and kind of ventures and thoughts that he's thrown out into the ether that I obviously don't like. As one of many examples of quote unquote successful people negating the important societal structures that impact one's life and relating the outcomes of anybody's life strictly to one's own actions. It's that pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality that just drives me insane. But all this leads me to say that even when I don't like what Kanye's doing or saying, I get where he's coming from almost all the time. And that's rare. And that allows me to really look at Kanye's music specifically with a very unique lens.